Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining. My name is Manny Castro. I'm the Technical Services Specialist here at Siegel Scientific, authors of the Bartender software. In today's webinar, we'll be building a file integration using a CSV file. You'll also learn how the fields in that CSV file can be used to select your printers, labels, and then of course populate your label. Before we begin discussing the specific integration we'll be building today, let's quickly cover three of the main components that make up your integration. At this point, your label is designed and you're ready to integrate with your system or other software. The three things to take into account are the trigger, the data, and the actions that will be executed. The trigger is going to be what is initially triggering the integration to occur. It is essentially what we're waiting for to execute what has been programmed into your integration. Some samples of this are file, database, or web integrations, or web triggers, I should say. And in today's example, our integration will be triggered by a file being dropped into a folder, which our integration has been configured to scan. The second is going to be the data. Data is going to be the format or structure of the data coming in over the trigger or integration method. There are several and really almost endless options on what kind of data and the structure that you can pass. The important thing, of course, is to make sure that the data structure is consistent. Some examples of this will be our CSV, print command script, or BTXML. Third is the action. The action is what you would like or need executed or done once the trigger has occurred. With Bartender, of course, one of those actions almost always ends up being to print a document of some sort. Now we'll see how all this comes together in the live demonstration portion of today's session, but it is important to understand these three main components of designing an integration. And that's not just for today's scenario, but also just in general for any integration that you'd like to build. One last thing that it's important to understand is that these are also interchangeable. For example, you can have a web integration that passes print command script data, and then the actions are to print the label. And you can also have a database integration or file integration that does the same thing. So, of course, now focusing back on today's session specifically, we'll be building a file integration that will be our trigger. The data is going to be CSV, structured data, and the actions that we're going to be executing, among a couple of other ones, will be to print the actual document. Today's trigger, as I mentioned, is going to be a CSV or comma-separated values file. A CSV file stores data in plain text or just a flat file. Each line of that file is a data record. Each record consists of one or more fields separated by commas and sometimes quotes. And each one of those fields can be mapped to data sources in text objects and barcodes on your label. You can also map fields to variables throughout your integration. For example, a field in your CSV data structure can select a printer, a label, number of copies, serial numbers, and really more. And this is really what makes CSV data useful. It can be used as dynamic or flexible data, if you will. And because CSV files and the data structure is commonly known and not proprietary to Bartender itself, it's easy for other parties, such as your ERP system or just other system engineers or technicians, to understand. So now that we have an understanding of the objective of today's session and have an introduction, a high-level introduction to Bartender and CSV trigger files, let's go ahead and build our integration. We are going to begin, though, by opening Bartender. And I'll be opening a label that I've previously designed. And we're going to take notice that we do have a few named data sources already on our label. So now, as we know at this point, I'm sure, a data source is what contains your data within a text object or barcode in Bartender. So we'll want to go ahead and look at these data sources and see what they look like. So for example, for this barcode right here, we have the zip. If we double click on this barcode, we'll get the properties dialog that comes up. On the left, we'll go to the data source. And again, anything that can contain data in Bartender will have one or more data sources. And this one specifically is set to chip to zip. So now I've actually specifically given it that name so that I can identify it within my integration. So we'll go ahead and we'll name some of these other data sources as well that have not been named previously. So we'll double click on our barcode, again clicking on the data source, and we are going to name this data source. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in a certain structure or even spelled correctly, really. All we're concerned about is that we can associate this named data source with a field in our CSV file. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that one more time so that we're sure that we're familiar on how to do that. We go into the properties of the text object by double clicking on it. We click on the data source, and on the right we're going to name this one as well. So we have store number. We're going to hit OK, close this out, and then we're going to notice that on the left here we have all our named data sources, including the two that we just created. Let's go ahead and save our label, minimize Bartender, and then we can begin building the integration itself. We're going to open Integration Builder. This is going to be our welcome screen when we're first building an integration from scratch. We're going to hit Create New Integration, and we'll then be prompted to select the integration method. So this is going to be the first of the three components that we discussed earlier. So for today's integration type, we're going to select File, and we're going to hit OK. And that's going to open up Integration Builder for us, and we'll get a little bit different UI there. So one of the main things that I like to pay attention to before I start building an integration is on the left here under the integration properties. We're going to want to take note of the user account that we're running our integration under. So now what this is going to do is if we have a PC that may be part of a domain or we're accessing resources out on the network, we want to make sure that we have access to those resources. So we'll want to run the integration under an account that has permissions to those. For today's example, we're actually running everything local, and we should be okay to just run it as a service. The next thing moving down in our UI is going to be the file detection. So as we know, this is a file integration. So we have to have a scan directory somewhere, whether it may be a network directory or local, so that we can scan it. For reference, here is my scan directory on my PC. We have it under the C drive, Bartender, Bartender, and scan folder. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is, because that's one of the first things that I'm going to need when designing my integration is to direct Integration Builder to this folder, I'm going to go ahead and copy it. So I'm going to copy that directory, and I'm going to go back to my Integration Builder. Once we're in the file detection properties, the first option that we have available to us to configure is going to be the folder to scan. So again, that's what folder are we monitoring. So let's go ahead and erase that. Paste in our scan directory, and then continue on through to the other options. The next important thing to note is going to be notification and polling. So do we want a poll behavior where we're polling every X amount of seconds or minutes, or do we want immediate? We're going to leave it on notification and polling for today's example. The next important thing to take note of is going to be the file pattern. So now, by default, you have the asterisk, which is the wildcard, and .dat. So that's going to be any file, because the asterisk is a wildcard, that has an extension of .dat. So the one important thing here to note is that we're reading or picking up that file, and we're reading it as a flat file. So we're not really too concerned with the extension and what type of application that extension is associated with. We're just worried about the contents of that trigger file. So now I do have a sample trigger file here on my desktop, and the extension of it is CSV. So let's just go ahead and erase .dat, and for simplicity, let's just name it .csv. So what I've done so far is I've told my integration, you want to scan this directory, and we're going to pick up any file that has a .csv extension. Moving on, the next option that we need to pay attention to is going to be the action after detection and the actions after failure. So this is what we want the integration to do once a file has been successfully processed or it has failed. The main options here are to rename the file, delete the file, or move. So today, since we're just testing this out, let's go ahead and just leave it on rename to .text. And if we do something incorrect, it'll rename it to .failed. Moving on, we can move down to the actions. So the way I like to think of these two options here in the integration builder, if you will, the integration and the actions, is that it's essentially the cause and the effect. So these are all the properties of the cause and what's going to trigger our integration. In this case, it's a file detection. And then this is the effect. So these are going to be the actions that are executed upon a trigger file being dropped into our directory. So for actions, for this specific integration type, what we're going to do is we're going to create a few actions, and then I'll explain what they mean and what they do momentarily. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the icon to the right of actions and add a new one. I'm going to go to database, and then I'm going to select transform text to record set. I'm going to hit OK, and my action has been created. Again, I'm going to go into the actions and add another one and do for each database record, again under the database section. So let's go ahead and let's start on the first one that we created. So we're going to we created a transform text to record set. So what this does, or what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to get a sample of the CSV file, and we're trying to connect to it and create or transform it to a record set. So now the reason that we want to do that is we want to transform just that flat file into almost a database, if you will, where we can grab fields from it, use them throughout our integration, and then also so that since it is a database at that point, we'll have records, so we can execute for each record. That's the next action there. So what I have here, and I can navigate out to it, I have in my bartender directory where I saved my label, just a sample CSV file. Now, the only important thing here on this sample CSV file is going to be the fields. So here, so you can get a visual on it, we have the printer name, the bartender label, the ship to address. So just data that we're going to use throughout the integration and to populate our label. So now what's important again is the fields. You'll notice that the data for the first record is just random data where we see data 1, data 2, data 3. So we don't really need live data. All we're concerned about is getting our mapping done. So I'll go ahead and I'll minimize this for now. Going back to the integration builder, we're at the transforms text to record set. We're going to go into this database connection setup, and we're going to make a connection to that sample label so we can get our fields down. So I'm going to hit Select File. I'm going to select that sample CSV file with all my correct fields in it. That happens to be in my bartender files directory for this one. I'm going to hit Next. Bartender is going to take a best guess at the file separation. And also this is known as the delimitation of the file. So today's example, we're actually doing a mix quote and comma, which is known as a CSV file as well. So really any fixed delimitation can be set here using the custom separator character option. So we're not just tied down to simply one delimitation type. So now the thing to remember when we were talking about the three main components is that we do want to be consistent moving forward. So if your system is producing a pipe delimited file, for example, that's completely fine and acceptable. Moving forward, you are going to be sort of committed to that unless you want to revamp your integration. So we'll go ahead and we'll take the selection that the wizard suggested to us. We'll go to the preview and we'll go to the fields, and there we see the CSV file transformed to a record set. That looks all correct to me. So we'll go ahead and we'll hit Next. It's going to ask us if the first record or row has the field names. Our CSV file does, so we'll go ahead and we'll preview one more time just to verify, and at this point we can hit Finish. So if we click on the record browser, we'll see that we have our data transformed to a record set. So we've done that successfully, so at this point we can hit OK. And then the next thing we're going to do is under text source, we see what the source of the transform text to record set action is going to be. By default here we have embedded template, and that's not really what we want today. So embedded template would mean whatever is here, and obviously that would be static, is going to be what's used. And that's not what we want. We actually want the contents of the trigger file to be used as the data. So we're going to click on the drop-down. We're going to select variables, and then we're going to select event data. So whenever you see event data, and not just for your file integration, but for any integration in general, event data is going to be the data that's being brought in through whatever integration method you have created. So that would be through a file, the contents of that file. Over a web request, it would be the contents of that web request. So we'll leave it on event data. We've done that correctly at this point. We can move down to for each database record. Here, we don't really have much to do, but we'll go ahead and we'll verify that we want to use the event data, again, to source the record set. So that's done correctly. And then the last thing we'll want to do is, by default, if you'll notice, we have this print document action that was created for us. So now that is the correct action that we need. However, it's in the wrong place. So what we need to do is we need to click and drag it down to the bottom, and not just down to the bottom of the integration or of the actions list, but we want to put it under for each database record. You'll notice the little red line that comes across the screen, and you'll want to make sure that you drop it there. What this does is it makes it a child action of the action above. And the reason that we want that is because we want it to be running in this loop. So say, for example, we drop a CSV file with 10 records on it. We don't want it to just execute the print document action for the first record and stop. We want it to loop and do for each database record, go through record 1 to record 10, and execute the whole trigger file. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's configure our print document action. So here we have quite a bit more homework to do. At the top, you'll notice that just in general, for any action, you can name it. When you start getting into complex integrations, it's sometimes easier to have a visual on the difference between all the different print actions. And then you also have the run action here. where you can build a statement or an expression under which what conditions this action's actually going to execute, or just simply known as conditionally execute. Next, we have the document. So this is actually the document that we want to print. So let's go ahead and bring in our document. We'll hit Browse. We're going to have to navigate to my bartender directory and find my bartender document, which happens to be this one, and then we'll hit Open. So at this point, we can also, a good trick is to import the document settings. So now we'll see what kind of settings that brings in here once we click it. We'll go ahead and we'll hit yes that we do want to continue. It's going to import the document settings for us. And now we'll notice going through here that it's automatically selected some options for us. So, for example, it's selected the printer that's associated with this label, the copies, and if we scroll down, most importantly, it's brought in all our named data sources that we just created. So here we see the store number and the UPC code. And then here, if we want to, we can change statically the values of those data sources, and those will change once the integration executes. So let's go ahead and let's go back to the top, because that's not exactly what we're doing today. We're actually going to have a lot of dynamic stuff because we want that CSV file to be populating and selecting a lot of these options, right? So after I hit the import document settings, what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase the name of the bartender document that you see here. So that directory is going to be fine, but I'm going to erase the BTW name. And then you'll notice throughout your integration that you see a little blue X. So whenever you click on that icon, it brings up your insert variable dialog. And what this does is it allows you to select variables from which you can pick and use throughout the integration. And some of those are going to be global or system variables, such as the server name, the username, the time under which the action actually executed. But most importantly, if you'll notice, under the action, now that we've set this CSV file up, we'll notice that we have the variable names throughout, and it allows us to use the fields within that CSV file as variables, giving us the ability to have dynamic properties throughout the integration. So for this one specifically, we're going to select bartender label, and we're going to hit OK. And now what's going to happen is whenever I drop a trigger file, whatever field or whatever value is under the field bartender label, that's going to be the bartender document that's selected to print. So that's now a dynamic field and a variable. And you can recognize those throughout your integration by taking note at the % before and after the actual variable name. So we can do the same thing for the printer. We can erase the printer name, click on our blue X, go to the variable that contains the printer name, and go ahead and hit OK. We now have a dynamic printer as well. Scrolling down, this is where we can map all our data sources, named data sources specifically, to the fields in that CSV file. So let's go ahead and let's go to ship to address. I'm going to actually erase what I have there. I'm going to click on the insert variable icon. I'm going to look for the ship to address, hit OK, and then this is where I'm going to do all my mapping. So now what's valuable about this specific method as well is that you can tell your label designer, who is not always the same person that's actually designing and deploying the integration, you can tell them all you need to do is name the data sources accordingly, and I'll design the integration from there. From here, a designer of the integration can actually go through here, look at what makes the most sense. So obviously here we don't have exact spelling matches. Map everything accordingly. And as long as the label designer did everything correctly, we're able to associate those static fields otherwise and turn them into essentially dynamic fields at that point. So the store number name data source, we'll go ahead and we'll continue linking those up. If you remember, that's the one that we just created. So store number. For the UPC code, we'll go ahead and we'll erase the data, and we can insert the UPC code variable. Then we'll do the same thing for the state and the city. And then also as well, what's good to know, or what you should know, is that you can also mix, just like we did with the file name itself, you can mix static data with variables. So for example, if we scroll back to the top, we'll notice that we have some static data. The folder directory never changes, and then the actual bartender document name does change. So at this point, we've created our integration. We've pointed the integration to the directory that we're going to be scanning. And then we're ready to just test this integration at this point. So just to verify, we're looking into that bartender scan directory, and we're looking for CSV files. So now we're going to direct our attention and go to the Test tab at the bottom left-hand corner of your window there. So in this panel here, this is going to be where you test all your integrations. So now it is important to know that when everything is running in this window, and specifically by window I mean the integration builder, it is not going to be running as what we call deployed. It is and what that means is if I close integration builder right now, this integration will stop. So it's not deployed until we actually deploy the integration into the administration console, which we will cover shortly once we're actually sure that we built it correctly and it passes testing. So up here is all the details and the status of your integration at the top. These are all the actions and the status of them. And then really importantly, especially while in the testing phase, is going to be the output window. So this is where we're going to see all the error messages and if we did everything correct, and then eventually once it's actually sent to the spooler, aka printed. So let's go ahead and let's hit the green icon up here, the play button, and we're going to start the integration. We'll see momentarily that the integration has started. So now initially you just want to start it, make sure that the account that you're running under has permissions to scan that directory. We don't have any error messages. Obviously the red and yellow are the ones to pay close attention to, while the other ones are just messages, general messages, and the events. So let's go ahead and let's navigate to our scan directory. We're going to open that directory, and it is empty. And then we're going to copy and paste this trigger file. So I'll go ahead and I'll edit this trigger file just so we can get a visual on it. So we see that we have different data than what we did in the sample database that we connected to. And this one actually has the printer name and some live data, and that's actually the name of the bartender document itself, of course. So let's close this out. Let's copy it. And let's paste it into our directory. We'll notice that the integration picks it right up. It's going through all the actions that we just programmed it to do. And then we're waiting for it to complete. We'll notice that it has changed to .text. It hasn't changed to .failed, which would indicate that we did something wrong. And then if we go back into our output dialog, we see that it went through all the actions, and then it successfully sent the print job to the spooler. Now, while you're in the testing phase here, what you can do as well is you can replay any of these actions. So if you don't have the ability to have your system or ERP system resend the trigger file, you can always play back the action event, and it'll go back in sequence and replay them. So at this point, I'm happy with my integration. I didn't get any error messages. It's running successfully, and it's processing the trigger files, and it's renaming them to .text, not .failed. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to save the integration. We're going to name it, we can name it the CSV file integration. And then what we're going to do is we can deploy this integration. Okay, so by hitting deploy, it's going to bring up another window, and we're going to get a few different options that are going to let us identify this and set some parameters. So mainly, we're going to actually give this a name of some sort. So CSV file is fine, just how we have this named. We're going to name the target servers. So what desktops or servers are we deploying this integration to? Today, we're sending it to the local PC, which is this one. And then the schedule. So what schedule do we want the integration to be deployed upon? At that point, we can go ahead and we can hit OK. And what's going to happen is the integration is going to deploy. It's going to open up the administration console. It's going to show us all our live integrations. And at this point, what we can do is we can actually close out the integration builder once we've verified that it is running. Okay, so here we see that it's running. We'll go ahead and we'll close out integration builder for now. I'm going to go ahead and drill into my integration. You'll note that this is where you can start and stop it. And do note that you can run more than one integration. So let's go ahead and drill into our integration here. We see that it's running. The status is green. Similar layout here. We see that the file integration has started. And now we can go ahead and we can actually test this integration. So we'll do a couple tests. So we'll do a test with the administration console open, so we can get a visual on it processing. So here we see the messages. Everything is blue or green, so we're doing well. And eventually, the job is sent to the spooler. So now, because we do want to actually run this, log out, and see this running without bartender running, we can go ahead and we can just close this out. And then let's say that you have your ERP system or your other piece of software actually live dropping files into this directory. We can copy and paste, and we'll notice that it gets automatically renamed right away to .text, telling us that the actual integration is still running in the background. And at this point, we've successfully designed a file CSV integration. Tell her whenever you're ready, if you can go ahead and start reading those out, please.
We had one question coming here about translations for the webinar today. And I can take this one if you don't recall. Is this webinar going to be translated specifically with Chinese subtitles?
We do have the webinars being translated. We don't have a full list yet. I believe that was one of the languages on the list. You should get an email with the post-webinar invitation, letting you know the details of that. And then if not, also be on the lookout for this and other content in our support portal, which I'll bring up shortly, so that we can, just in general, just a good resource.
What are the advantages to using a CSV file integration that we created today?
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of one of the common questions that we have. In general, the advantages to having a CSV file, it's not just a CSV file integration, but just in general, the CSV data structure is a commonly known data structure. So what that allows you to do is, if you request that of your other system engineer, your other ERP system engineer, they'll understand what that means and be able to easier provide that for you.
there was a question about how many labels we just printed. Is that a single label, or are we sending multiple copies? Can you explain that a little bit more?
Mm-hmm. So on this one, on this example, we don't have a field for copies, but we most definitely could. And then also, more importantly, remember that each one of those records could be another job. So if we added another record to that CSV file, it could print out another label to another printer with completely different data. So again, all we're worried about is those fields, and as long as those fields match, you can print whichever label you need, as many copies as you need, and as many jobs as you need per CSV file.
And we had some more questions coming in on that translation. I don't know if it'll be downloadable, and I don't know if you have an answer to that one as well, Manny, but I know we will be hosting it online. And then the other question regarding that is it going to be hosted on YouTube? Which I think the answer to that is no, correct? We're doing our own internal hosting on that, right?
Yeah, so for that one, we'll take note of all the questions that are in regards to translation and when and where it'll be hosted. Mm-hmm. And we can get a list of those emails to our marketing team, and they can answer those questions directly. Just send out a response as to where it's located and the status of the translations, if we do any.
Somebody else had a question here about some of those conditional printing options for the actions. I know this is a little bit of a larger topic, but maybe you can briefly go into a little more depth on how those conditions might work, especially with like an integration we saw today.
Yeah, so pretty much what you can do is, for example, say that your system is not able to pick the label that you print. Perhaps it's only by region or by area of your warehouse, whatever it may be. You can look at fields in that CSV file, and not just CSV file really, it's really any kind of data that's coming in, and you can build a condition under which that action will execute. So for example, if you have labels that are meant for Europe and only Europe, you can automatically set it so that we pick out that data and we only execute the Europe label under that condition. And then really from there it's just whatever else you can come up with as far as your imagination.
All right, thanks, Manny.
So while we get the last minute questions in, one more resource or topic that I really wanted to briefly cover is to bring up the support portal. So the address to this, or the web address, is going to be support.siegelscientific.com. And again, as I mentioned, this is a good resource for not just today's topic or integration topics, but just bartender in general. So if there's anything you're not sure about or statuses or anything like that, we always have information being uploaded here. And this is a resource that I always suggest people check out. Okay, do we have any other questions there? With that being said, Tyler?
No, we didn't get any other questions in, so I think we are all set.
Well, once again, everybody, thank you very much for attending. I hope you learned a little bit about building a CSV file integration. Have a great rest of your day.